There's a watch that sold for $31 million in 2019. It doesn't connect to Wi-Fi. It can't track your steps. It's less accurate than the $20 Quartz watch at your local drugstore. And here's the strangest part. The family that made it was embarrassed by the price. They said the watch wasn't meant to be sold. It was meant to be inherited. This is the story of how a broken soldier with nothing but his grandfather's pocket watch created a brand that doesn't sell time, it sells immortality. November 29th, 1831, Warsaw, Poland, 11:47 p.m. The temperature had plunged to -15 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold that turns your breath into ice crystals before it leaves your mouth, the kind that makes your fingers go numb inside your gloves, the kind that kills as efficiently as any bullet. 24-year-old Antoine Norbert de Patek crouched behind an overturned carriage in Castle Square, his cavalry officer's uniform soaked through with a mixture of melted snow, mud, and blood, not all of it his own. Russian artillery shells screamed overhead, each explosion painting the winter sky orange and red, each impact shaking the cobblestones beneath his boots like the earth itself was trying to swallow Warsaw whole. His hands, aristocratic hands that had been trained to hold champagne flutes and sign documents in perfect calligraphy, now gripped a rifle that hadn't been cleaned in 3 days. Those same hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion and hypothermia. He'd been fighting for 14 hours straight. Around him, the city that had been his entire world was dying. Buildings his family had patronized for generations collapsed into rubble. Churches where he'd attended Mass as a boy burned in the heat, their bells melting, creating discordant screams as the metal warped. The smell was apocalyptic, burning wood, gunpowder, and underneath it all, the sweet, sick odor of death that you can never forget once you've smelled it. Beside him, his closest friend from the cavalry, Joseph, a blacksmith's son who could make his horse dance like a ballerina, lay with half his face missing, eyes still open, still staring at nothing. They'd shared a cigarette just 2 hours ago. Joseph had been joking about the girl he'd marry when the revolution succeeded. When, not if. They'd all believed in when. But there would be no when. The November uprising, Poland's desperate attempt to throw off Russian occupation, was collapsing. 10 months of hope, sacrifice, and blood were ending in this frozen night of horror. Antoine could hear the screams of civilians being executed in the streets, could hear the Russian army singing victory songs, drunk on vodka and triumph. In that moment, crouched in the freezing darkness with his dead friend beside him and his country dying around him, Antoine reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the only thing of value he still possessed, his grandfather's pocket watch. His grandfather, Count Patek of Piasky, had given it to him on his 18th birthday. It was French-made, exquisite, with a white enamel dial and delicate Roman numerals. On the back was engraved, "Time passes, love remains." His grandfather had held his young face in weathered hands and said, "Antoine, empires fall, fortunes disappear, but this watch, this will survive. When I'm gone, when you wind this watch, you'll hear my heartbeat. You'll never be alone." Now, 6 years later, with frozen fingers that could barely feel the metal, Antoine wound the watch. Click, click, click. The sound was impossibly delicate against the thunder of artillery. But in that sound, he heard his grandfather. He heard his childhood. He heard everything he was about to lose. A Russian officer shouted nearby. They were sweeping the square, executing survivors. Antoine had seconds to make a choice: stay and die for a revolution that was already dead, or run and live as something worse than dead, an exile, a refugee, a man without a country. He looked at Joseph's ruined face. He looked at the burning city. He He felt the watch ticking against his palm. Tick, tick, tick. Each beat a whispered command. Live, survive, remember. Antoine ran.
He'd escaped Warsaw with 17 other officers, traveling through Prussia on forged papers, always moving at night, always one step ahead of Russian agents who hunted Polish rebels like animals. They'd hidden in barns, in cellars, in pigsties. He'd eaten moldy bread and considered it a feast. He'd watched 2 of his fellow officers die from infected wounds because they couldn't risk seeing a doctor. When he finally reached Paris, the city of lights, the promised land of liberty and enlightenment, he discovered a cruel truth. Paris didn't want Polish refugees. The city was already drowning in exiles from a dozen failed revolutions. The French, exhausted from their own upheavals, saw Polish refugees as desperate, potentially violent, certainly poor, which they were. Antoine's apartment was an attic garret so small he could touch both walls if he spread his arms. The ceiling sloped so dramatically that he could only stand upright in the center. When it rained, and Paris in winter rained constantly, water leaked through the roof and pooled in the corner where he kept his meager possessions. One change of clothes, a Bible his mother had given him, and his grandfather's watch. The cold was different from Warsaw's cold, not as intense, but more wet, more insidious. It crept into your bones and settled there. The tiny iron stove in the corner barely produced warmth, and coal cost money he didn't have. Most nights he'd lie on his thin mattress, wrapped in every piece of clothing he owned, teeth chattering, body shaking. He was starving. Not the dramatic starvation of missing one meal, but the slow, grinding malnutrition of eating one piece of bread per day, of feeling your body consume itself, of waking up weaker than when you went to sleep. His gums bled, his hair fell out in clumps, his aristocratic face had become gaunt, skeletal, a ghost's face. During the day, he walked the streets looking for work, any work. But who would hire him? A Polish refugee with no connections, no French skills beyond basic phrases, no trade except warfare? He'd been trained to lead men, to ride horses, to discuss philosophy and poetry, utterly useless skills in practical Paris. The other Polish exiles he'd arrived with were disappearing one by one. Some managed to find positions as toothers or clerks. Others simply vanished. Whether they'd moved on, returned to Poland to face execution, or died quietly in similar garrets, Antoine never knew. He was becoming invisible, irrelevant, a ghost haunting the streets of a city that had no use for him. Every night in that freezing attic, Antoine performed the same ritual. He would take out his grandfather's watch, now the only possession connecting him to who he'd been, and wind it. Click, click, click. Then he'd hold it to his ear and listen to it tick. Tick, tick, tick. In those moments, holding that watch, he'd close his eyes and remember. The Patek estate in summer, fields of wheat golden in the sunlight, his mother's laugh, dancing at balls with girls whose names he could no longer quite recall, the weight of his cavalry saber, the pride of wearing his uniform for the first time, Yosef's terrible jokes, the belief, the absolute certainty that they were fighting for something noble, something worth dying for. And then he'd open his eyes to the water-stained walls, the freezing darkness, the gnawing hunger, and the crushing realization he was nobody. He had nothing. He was nothing. One night in February, so cold his breath created frost patterns on the inside of his window, Antoine sat on his mattress, holding the watch, and genuinely contemplated selling it. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His landlord was threatening eviction. The watch was valuable. It could feed him for months. He opened the case, stared at the engraving. Time passes, love remains. His grandfather's words echoed. When you wind this watch, you'll hear my heartbeat. You'll never be alone. And Antoine broke, just shattered. This 24-year-old man who'd charged into artillery fire, who'd watched his best friend die, who'd run through a burning city, who'd crossed half of Europe sleeping in ditches. He sat on that filthy mattress in that freezing garret and sobbed like a child. Great racking sobs that hurt his malnourished chest, that made his skeletal body shake, because he realized something profound in that moment of despair. The watch wasn't measuring time. The watch was defeating it. His grandfather was dead for 4 years. Warsaw was ashes. His former life was gone. His family was scattered or dead. But the watch still ticked. The watch survived. The watch remembered. As long as the watch existed, as long as those tiny gears turned and those delicate hands swept around the dial, his grandfather lived, Poland lived, honor lived, love lived. Antoine held the watch against his heart and made a vow in that dark attic. Someday I will make watches that do this, watches that survive when everything else dies, watches that connect people across time, across loss, across death itself. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I will find a way to make time meaningful instead of cruel. He didn't sell the watch. Instead, he sold his Bible, a betrayal that haunted him, but he needed to eat. And the next morning, weak and dizzy from hunger, he walked to the workshops where craftsmen made and sold watches. He had no skills, no connections, no experience, but he had desperation. And sometimes, desperation is the most powerful skill of all.
Antoine talked his way into a position with a watch merchant. Barely a position, really. He was less than an apprentice, more like a shop boy. His job was to polish display cases, wrap purchases, deliver orders to wealthy clients' homes. The pay was barely enough to afford bread and keep his garret. But Antoine watched everything. When the master watchmaker repaired a complicated piece, Antoine would linger nearby, pretending to clean something, his eyes absorbing every movement. When wealthy clients came in discussing their timepieces, Antoine listened to their language, learned what they valued, understood what transformed a mere object into something precious. He discovered he had a gift, not for making watches. He couldn't afford tools or training, but for understanding them. More importantly, for understanding what they meant to people. Watches weren't about time. They were about memory, status, identity, connection. For 3 grueling years, Antoine lived in that liminal space between poverty and respectability. He taught himself French until he spoke it perfectly, with barely a trace of accent. He read every book he could borrow about horology, about watchmaking history, about the craft. He befriended other exiles, built a network of dispossessed aristocrats and artists who had nothing, but still somehow supported each other. And every single night, he wound his grandfather's watch. In 1839, 8 years after fleeing Warsaw, Antoine attended the French Industrial Exhibition, a showcase of modern innovation and craftsmanship. He'd saved for months to afford the entry fee. He wandered through the exhibits in a daze, seeing marvels, new steam engines, photographic equipment, textile machines, and of course, watches. That's where he met Francois Patek, a Czech watchmaker who'd been displaying his work. They began talking, 2 exiles, 2 men who'd lost their countries, but not their ambitions. Patek mentioned he was looking for a business partner, someone who understood sales and presentation. He could make watches. He needed someone to sell them. Antoine saw his chance. The refugee who'd had nothing, who'd starved in a garret, who'd sold his Bible to survive, proposed a partnership. Patek, Philippe, and C. It was audacious. It was desperate. It was everything Antoine had left. Philippe agreed. On May 1st, 1839, they opened their workshop. Antoine was 32 years old. It had taken him 8 years to build back from nothing to something, from invisibility to purpose. But he never forgot that freezing attic, never forgot the hunger, never forgot holding his grandfather's watch and realizing that some objects transcend their function. They become vessels of memory, carriers of love, defenders against death and forgetting. He poured all of that pain, all of that loss, all of that desperate need for connection into his work. When he sold a watch, he wasn't selling time. He was selling what that watch in the attic had given him, the ability to hold someone you've lost, to defeat distance and death, to say, "I remember," across the void. Customers felt it. They couldn't articulate it, but they felt it. This intense, almost desperate man with the aristocratic bearing and the haunted eyes. When he sold you a watch, you understood you were buying more than gears and gold. You were buying a promise. This will survive. This will remember. When everything else is gone, this will remain.
1844. The partnership with Zapek was freeing. They wanted different things. Zapek wanted to make good watches and sell them at good prices, respectable business. Antoine wanted something Zapek thought was insane. Perfection. Absolute, uncompromising, economically irrational perfection. They'd been arguing for months. Zapek kept saying, "Antoine, we need to make money. We need to be practical." And Antoine, now 37, hardened by years of exile and poverty, would respond, "If I wanted practical, I would have stayed in Poland and let them execute me. Practical is for people who don't understand what we're really making." The partnership was dying. Antoine knew it, and part of him welcomed it. Better to fail pursuing perfection than succeed at mediocrity. He was walking through the 1844 exhibition, already mentally preparing to end the partnership, when he saw a crowd gathered around a booth. Men in suits, watchmakers, enthusiasts, all pressing forward to see something. Antoine pushed through and saw him, Jean-Adrien Philippe, a thin Frenchman with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers, demonstrating his invention, a keyless winding mechanism for pocket watches. Now, understand, in 1844, all pocket watches required separate keys to wind them. You'd insert a key into the watch case, wind it, remove the key, store the key separately. If you lost the key, your watch was useless. It was clumsy, inelegant, a necessary evil. Philippe's invention eliminated the key entirely. The watch wound from a crown integrated into the case. You twisted it, and internal gears engaged. The watch was self-contained, complete, needing nothing external to function. Antoine watched Philippe demonstrate this mechanism, and he felt something he hadn't felt since that freezing night in Warsaw. A moment of perfect clarity, of destiny crystallizing. He stayed at Philippe's booth for 3 hours, watching the demonstration again and again. Other spectators came and went, but Antoine remained, and Philippe noticed. When the exhibition closed for the day, Philippe approached this intense man who'd been staring at his invention like it was a religious icon. "You seem captivated," Philippe said carefully. Antoine looked at him with those haunted eyes and said something strange. "You've made a watch that doesn't need anyone else, a watch that's complete within itself." Philippe blinked. "I suppose, yes, it's more convenient." "No," Antoine interrupted, his voice sharp. "Convenience is for merchants. You've made something profound. You've made a watch that survives without external dependencies. Do you understand what that means?" Philippe, this rational craftsman, said slowly, "Why don't you tell me?" And Antoine did. He told Philippe about Warsaw burning, about the garret in Paris, about his grandfather's watch ticking in the darkness, connecting him to a world that no longer existed. He told Philippe about survival, about loss, about making objects that carry meaning across time. Philippe listened, stunned. This wasn't how watchmakers usually talked. This was poetry. This was philosophy. This was someone who understood that watches weren't measuring time, they were defying it. "I want to partner with you," Antoine said. "I want to make watches that last forever, watches that people pass down through generations, watches that survive wars, revolutions, the death of everything. Can you do that?" Philippe, this rational engineer, looked at this passionate exile and saw something he recognized, someone who cared as desperately about craft as Philippe did about precision. "Yes," Philippe said simply, "I can do that. But it will be expensive, it will be slow, we'll make fewer watches than our competitors, we'll never be the biggest." Antoine smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Then we'll be the best." They shook hands, two men, meeting by accident, united by a shared obsession, creating objects that would outlive them, that would carry forward the very best of human craft and care into an uncertain future.
1845. Patek Philippe and Company is born. Their first workshop was modest, 6 employees, a few benches, tools, and audacious mission. Never compromise, ever. From the beginning, they established principles that would have bankrupted most businesses. Principle 1, every watch would be serviced forever. They would keep parts, maintain records, and repair any Patek Philippe watch, no matter how old. This was economically insane. It meant committing to exist in perpetuity. Principle 2, hand finishing on every component, even parts that would never be seen once the watch was assembled. Why polish a gear that lives inside the case? Because they would know. Because integrity means doing the work no one sees. Principle 3, innovation without marketing gimmicks. They would advance watchmaking, but never at the expense of reliability or craft. Their employees thought they were mad. One watchmaker quit, saying, "You're building watches for people who don't exist yet. You're spending time on details that customers will never appreciate. This is suicide." Antoine's response was cold. "Then leave. We're not making watches for customers. We're making watches for eternity." The remaining watchmakers stayed, and slowly they began to understand. They were part of something larger than business. They were part of a mission. In 1851, they received a commission that would establish their reputation. Queen Victoria herself requested a Patek Philippe watch. Not because of advertising, they barely advertised, but because word had spread among European aristocracy. These madmen in Paris were making the finest watches in the world. The watch they created for Victoria was perfect. Not merely accurate, but perfect. Every surface polished, every gear precisely adjusted, every jewel carefully set. When Antoine delivered it personally to the royal representative, he said something unusual. "Tell Her Majesty that this watch will outlive her, her children, and her grandchildren. We guarantee it. And when her descendants needed service 100 years from now, we will still be here." The representative blinked. "That's quite a promise." "It's not a promise. It's who we are." That watch is still running today, 175 years later, still accurate, still beautiful. Queen Victoria is long dead. The British Empire has risen and fallen, but that watch keeps ticking. 1877. Antoine Norbert de Patek dies. He was 70 years old. having lived 30 years longer than most of his fellow revolutionaries from that frozen night in Warsaw. He died in his workshop, surrounded by watches, the sound of ticking all around him like a mechanical heartbeat. On his deathbed, he held his grandfather's watch, now 55 years old, worn smooth by constant use, but still running perfectly. He wound it one last time, click, 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 and whispered to his son, "I kept my promise. We made time meaningful." His funeral was attended by 300 watchmakers from across Europe. Competitors, collaborators, craftsmen who'd never met him but revered what he'd built. They carried his coffin through Geneva, the company had moved there, and every watchmaker in the procession was holding a Patek Philippe watch, all of them synchronized perfectly. When they lowered him into the ground, those 300 watches ticked in unison. A mechanical heartbeat, a final goodbye from the man who transformed watches from tools into legacies. Jean-Adrien Philippe continued the company, maintaining Antoine's vision with religious devotion. When Philippe died in 1894, the company passed to others, but the principles remained sacred, inviolate. 1932, Geneva, Switzerland, the Great Depression. The luxury watch industry was dying. Banks had collapsed, fortunes evaporated. The wealthy, the only people who could afford complicated watches, were suddenly broke. Patek Philippe was hemorrhaging money, on the verge of bankruptcy. Enter Charles and Jean Stern, two brothers who owned a dial-making company that supplied Patek Philippe. They were watch people, craftsmen who understood the philosophy, even if they'd never met Antoine. The Sterns didn't see a failing business. They saw a cathedral about to be demolished for scrap. They bought the company, not as an investment, but as a rescue mission. And they made a vow: the principles don't change. Not for money, not for survival, not ever. The 1930s were brutal. Employees begged them to compromise. "We'll go bankrupt." Charles Stern's response: "Then we'll go bankrupt doing the right thing. I'd rather close the doors than betray what this company represents." When World War II came, when Geneva was surrounded by Nazi-occupied territory, when the future looked apocalyptic, the Sterns kept making watches, not because it made business sense, but because stopping would mean admitting that craft, that beauty, that meaning could be destroyed by circumstance. Those watches, made during the darkest days of the war, they're now among the most valuable, not because they're rare, but because they represent something profound: human dedication to beauty and precision, even as the world burned. 1970s. The watch industry faced extinction. Quartz watches arrived, battery-powered, electronic, requiring no winding. A $50 quartz watch kept better time than a $10,000 Patek Philippe. The Swiss watch industry collapsed. Legendary brands went bankrupt or sold out to conglomerates. Mechanical watchmaking, a craft perfected over centuries, seemed destined to museums. Patek Philippe's competitors panicked, pivoting to quartz, abandoning mechanical movements like they were obsolete technology. Thierry Stern, Charles's grandson, now running the company, said something that must have sounded insane. "We're not making quartz watches. We're staying with mechanical." The employees were stunned, but the market? The market doesn't understand what we make. We don't make tools for measuring time. Phones do that better. Computers do that better. We make objects that carry meaning, that connect generations, that represent the very best of human craft. That doesn't become obsolete just because there's something more accurate. It was a massive gamble. If mechanical watches died, Patek Philippe died. But Thierry understood something profound. In a world of disposable precision, permanence would become the ultimate luxury. The Caliber 89, a monument to obsession. 1980s, a project begins that seems like madness. For Patek Philippe's 150th anniversary in 1989, they decided to create the most complicated mechanical watch ever made. They called it the Caliber 89. The specifications were absurd. 33 complications, 1,728 components, displays for time, date, day, month, year, leap year, century, sunrise, sunset times, equation of time, sidereal time, lunar phases, moon age, star chart for the night sky visible from Geneva, and, most impressively, a display showing the date of Easter for any year. Easter's date requires complex calculations based on lunar cycles and requires different algorithms for dates before and after October 1582 when the calendar changed. The watch took 9 years to design and build. 9 years. Teams of master watchmakers working on individual complications. Then the nightmare of assembling all 1,728 components into a functioning whole. When completed, it weighed over a kilogram, required a 200-page instruction manual, and was so complicated that it needed its own custom display case just to show all its functions. Cost to make? Estimated $5 million. Market for such a watch? Effectively zero. So why build it? Thierry Stern explained, because we can. Because in 1989, in an age of quartz and computers, we wanted to prove that human hands and human minds could still create something no machine could replicate. We wanted to show that we hadn't forgotten how to do things that everyone else had abandoned as obsolete. Caliber 89 wasn't a product, it was a manifesto. It screamed, we are not surviving, we are transcending. When it was unveiled, the watch world stood in stunned silence. Then they began to understand. Patek Philippe wasn't competing with Seiko or Casio. They were competing with cathedrals, with symphonies, with art. They were asking, what can humans create when we care more about meaning than efficiency? 1996. An advertising agency presents a campaign with a portfolio of soft focus photographs. Fathers and sons fishing together. Mothers and daughters at pianos. Grandfathers teaching grandchildren to wind watches. The proposed tagline, you never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation. Thierry stared at this in silence for a long time. Then he said, this is perfect. Do you know why? Because it's true. We have customers writing to us about inheriting their grandfather's watches, about watches surviving wars and exiles and revolutions. We're not selling watches, we're facilitating connections across time. This ad doesn't invent a message, it reveals what we've always been. The campaign launched and changed luxury marketing forever. It told potential customers, you cannot own this. In a consumer society built entirely on ownership and accumulation, Patek Philippe said, you're not the end point, you're the caretaker. This belongs to your descendants. It transformed luxury from self-indulgence into stewardship, from materialism into legacy. Sales exploded, not because of clever marketing, but because the message resonated with something deep, the desire to matter beyond our own lifespans, to leave something beautiful for those who come after us. Today, Geneva, Switzerland, the Patek Philippe workshop.
In a clean room where the air is filtered to remove particles smaller than a human hair can see, a 62-year-old watchmaker named Marie bends over a movement containing 743 components. She's been working on this particular watch for 6 months. She'll work on it for 6 more months before it's complete. With tools that look like they belong in microsurgery, she polishes a bridge, a small metal component that will be hidden inside the watch once it's assembled. She polishes it for 40 minutes until it achieves a perfect mirror finish. No customer will ever see this component. Marie knows this. She polishes it anyway. Why? 200 years from now. A young person whose world we cannot imagine, different technologies, different problems, different dreams, finds a box in their great-great-great-grandmother's belongings. Inside is a watch, a Patek Philippe, made in 2025. They wind it, click, 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 and it begins to tick, 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 tick. The movement is still precise, the case is still beautiful, the sapphire crystal is still clear. Every one of those 743 components Marie assembled is still functioning exactly as designed. This young person in 2225 holds the watch to their ear, listens to it tick, and suddenly feels connected to their ancestor, to us, to everyone who touched this watch across 2 centuries. They feel the presence of the refugee who dreamed this into existence, of the craftsman who built it, of the family members who treasured it. They understand without words, someone in 2025 cared enough about the future to create something worthy of surviving into it. That's not marketing, that's not business, that's love made tangible, that's time made meaningful, that's a promise kept across centuries. And somewhere in the incomprehensible beyond, Antoine Norbert de Patek, the broken soldier who ran from a burning city with nothing but his grandfather's watch, smiles. Because his watch is still ticking, his promise is still kept, his love still remains. Time passes, love remains.